The boy. No one wanted. The mountain market was alive with haggling voices and the smell of smoked venison when 6-year-old Mila Rowan tugged her father's coat sleeve and pointed toward the broken cart at the edge of the square. "Daddy," she whispered, her breath fogging in the December cold. "Can we buy that boy?" Caleb Rowan froze mid-step, his heart lurching. There, huddled against splintered wood, sat a child no older than 8, barefoot in the snow, ribs showing through torn fabric, eyes hollow with hunger. And in that moment, the question his daughter asked wasn't about charity. It was about whether a man could face his past. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, I'd love to know. Drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now settle in, because what happened next on that frozen mountain changed 3 lives forever. The wind came down hard off the Rockies that December morning, cutting through the pines like a blade through canvas. Caleb Rowan had lived in these mountains long enough to read the sky, and today it promised snow by nightfall, heavy, unforgiving snow that would bury the trails until spring thought about thawing them. He'd planned to be back in his cabin before the first flakes fell, but Mila had other ideas. "Please, Daddy," she'd said at dawn, her small hands pressed together like she was praying, though Caleb never taught her that. "Just this once. I want to see the Christmas market." Caleb wasn't a man who celebrated much of anything anymore. Christmas had died for him 7 years ago, buried alongside his wife Sarah in the churchyard down in Boulder. But Mila had her mother's eyes, gray as morning mist, and when she looked at him that way, every wall he'd built came down like kindling. So he'd saddled the horses, bundled Mila in furs until she looked like a small bear, and made the 3-hour ride down to Timber Ridge. The settlement wasn't much, a trading post, a livery, a cluster of cabins that pretended to be a town. But twice a year, trappers and homesteaders came from 100 miles around to trade, drink, and remember they were still part of civilization. Caleb hated crowds, hated the noise, the false cheer, the way men looked at him with questions in their eyes. Why does he live up there alone? What's he hiding from? But he loved his daughter more than he hated discomfort, so he endured. The market square was chaos, stalls selling pelts and preserves, a fiddler playing something almost musical, children darting between wagons while their mothers shouted warnings. Mila's eyes went wide, drinking it all in like she'd stumbled into a fairy tale. Caleb kept one hand on her shoulder, steering her through the press of bodies, counting the minutes until they could leave. That's when she saw the boy. Caleb didn't notice at first. He was watching a trapper argue over the price of beaver pelts, calculating whether he had enough to trade for the flour and sugar Mila wanted for her Christmas cookies. Then he felt her go still beneath his palm, her whole body rigid. "Daddy." Her voice was small, strange. "Daddy, look." He followed her gaze. At the edge of the square, away from the warmth and light, a wagon sat askew on a broken axle. It looked abandoned, the kind of wreck people left behind when it wasn't worth fixing. But it wasn't empty. Huddled against the wagon bed, half hidden in shadow, was a child. A boy, maybe 8 years old, though hunger made age hard to guess. He wore trousers that ended above his ankles and a shirt so thin Caleb could see his ribs through the fabric. No coat. No shoes. His feet were blue-white against the frozen ground, and his arms were wrapped tight around his knees, trying to hold in what little warmth he had left. But it was his eyes that hit Caleb like a fist to the chest. Empty eyes, the kind that had stopped expecting rescue. "Daddy," Mila whispered again, and this time her voice cracked. "Can we buy that boy?" The question landed wrong, all wrong, and Caleb's first instinct was to correct her. "You don't buy people, Mila," but the words died in his throat. Because she wasn't wrong, not really. Not out here, where the law was thin as mountain air and desperation made monsters of ordinary men. "Stay here," Caleb said quietly, but Mila's hand shot out and grabbed his coat. "Don't leave me!" Her eyes were wet now, fierce. "I want to come." Caleb hesitated, then nodded. They crossed the square together, boots crunching through frozen mud, until they stood in front of the broken wagon. Up close, the boy looked worse. Bruises yellowing along his jaw, cuts on his hands, a hollowness that went deeper than hunger. The boy didn't look up, didn't move. Like he'd learned that being invisible was safer than being seen. Caleb crouched down slowly, the way he would approaching a wounded animal. Hey there, son. Nothing. Not even a flicker. Mila knelt beside her father, heedless of the cold mud soaking through her skirts. She reached into the pocket of her coat and pulled out something wrapped in cloth, half a biscuit she'd saved from breakfast. She held it out with both hands, offering it like a gift. Are you hungry? She asked softly. The boy's eyes moved then, just barely. They fixed on the biscuit with the kind of focus that comes from knowing hunger as a constant companion, but he didn't reach for it, like he didn't believe it was real or didn't believe he deserved it. Go on, Caleb said, his voice rougher than he intended. Take it. Slowly, so slowly, the boy's hand crept forward. His fingers were raw, nails broken, and when he took the biscuit, he clutched it so tight Caleb thought it might crumble. Then he shoved the whole thing in his mouth at once, chewing frantically, eyes darting like he expected someone to take it back. When did you last eat? Caleb asked. The boy swallowed hard, still not speaking, but his eyes answered. I don't remember. Mila tugged Caleb's sleeve. Daddy, we have to help him. I know, sweetheart. But even as he said it, Caleb felt the old resistance rising. He'd come to these mountains to escape complications, to live a simple life where the only people he was responsible for were himself and Mila. Getting involved in someone else's trouble, that was a door he'd nailed shut years ago. Where are your people? Caleb tried again. The boy flinched at the question and something dark passed across his face. Fear, deep, bone-cold fear. Did someone hurt you? Still nothing. But the trembling started, small shakes that worked through his thin frame like fault lines before an earthquake. Caleb straightened, scanning the market. No one was watching. No one cared. This child could freeze to death 20 feet from a crowd, and by morning, he'd just be another sad story people told over whiskey. We can't just leave him, Mila said, and there was steel in her voice that reminded Caleb so much of Sarah it hurt. I'm not planning to. The words came out before Caleb could stop them, before he could think through what they meant. He looked down at the boy again. You got a name, son? Silence stretched long enough that Caleb thought the question would go unanswered. Then, barely audible, came a whisper. Noah. Noah. Caleb tested the name, let it settle. I'm Caleb. This is Mila. You hungry for more than a biscuit? The smallest nod. All right then, come on. Caleb stood and held out his hand. For a long moment, Noah just stared at it, like he was trying to calculate the cost of acceptance, weighing survival against whatever hell he was running from. Then, with the hesitation of someone who'd been betrayed before, he placed his small, freezing hand in Caleb's calloused palm. The contact sent a jolt through Caleb. The fragility of those thin fingers, the ice-cold skin, the way the boy's hand trembled. He pulled Noah to his feet gently, noting how the child swayed, how his legs barely held him. Can you walk? Yes, sir. The voice was hoarse, unused to speaking. They made slow progress through the market, Caleb keeping his pace measured so Noah could keep up. People glanced at them, a mountain man, a well-dressed little girl, and a half-frozen street urchin. But no one stopped them. No one asked questions. That was frontier courtesy. Mind your business, let others mind theirs. Caleb led them to the trading post where Silas McKay ran a rough establishment that sold everything from rifle ammunition to penny candy. Silas was leaning against the counter, picking his teeth with a splinter when they walked in. Caleb Rowan. Silas straightened, surprised. Didn't expect to see you down here. Thought you'd hermit it up for the season. Needed supplies. Caleb gestured toward a table in the corner. Sit, he told Noah and Mila. I'll be right back. He approached the counter while Silas's eyes tracked the ragged boy with undisguised curiosity. That kid yours? He is now, Caleb said, the word surprising even himself. Silas raised an eyebrow but didn't press. What can I get you? Hot food. Stew if you got it. 3 bowls and coffee. Coming up. Silas disappeared into the back room, leaving Caleb alone with his thoughts. Dangerous territory. He glanced over at the table where Mila sat close to Noah, talking quietly. The boy wasn't responding, but he wasn't pulling away either, and that seemed like progress. What are you doing, Caleb? The voice in his head sounded like Sarah's, practical, concerned, loving. You can't save every lost soul in the territory. I'm not trying to save every lost soul, he thought back. Just this one. Why? Because when Mila asked if they could buy the boy, something had cracked open inside Caleb's chest, something he'd kept sealed tight since the day they lowered Sarah's coffin into frozen ground. A memory, sharp as broken glass. Another boy. Another winter. Another time when someone should have helped but didn't. Jacob. Caleb's younger brother, dead at 9 years old because their father was too proud to ask for help when the fever came. Dead because Caleb, at 12, hadn't known what to do except watch and pray and fail. He'd buried that memory deep, covered it with distance and silence. But one question from a 6-year-old girl had dug it up again, and now Caleb couldn't look away. Silas returned with 3 steaming bowls of elk stew and a pot of coffee that smelled like salvation. Caleb paid in silver coin, then carried everything to the table. Eat slow, he told Noah, setting a bowl in front of him. You'll make yourself sick otherwise. The boy stared at the stew like it might vanish if he blinked. Then he picked up the spoon with shaking hands and took a careful bite. His eyes closed. For just a moment the fear left his face, replaced by something that looked almost like relief. Mila ate her stew with neat, small bites, watching Noah the whole time. Caleb poured coffee for himself, letting the warmth seep into his hands while he observed. Noah was methodical, controlled, each spoonful deliberate, like he was rationing even abundance. That kind of discipline came from living hungry, from never knowing when the next meal might come. How long you been on your own? Caleb asked quietly. Noah's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. He set it down carefully, eyes dropping to the table. Don't know, sir. Long time. Where'd you come from? Different places. The words came out flat, rehearsed, the answer of someone who'd learned not to give away too much. Anyone looking for you? The spoon clattered against the bowl. Noah's hands clenched into fists, and his breathing quickened, short, panicked gasps that made Caleb's gut twist. Easy, Caleb said, keeping his voice level. Easy, son. I'm not turning you over to anybody. Just need to know what we're dealing with. Noah's eyes flicked up, searching, desperate, looking for the lie, the trap, the betrayal he'd learned to expect. I promise, Caleb added, and he meant it with a certainty that unsettled him. The boy's breathing slowed, but his hands stayed fisted. There's men. They buy kids. Make 'em work. I ran. How long ago? 3 days, maybe more. Noah's voice dropped to barely a whisper. They'll be looking. Mila reached across the table and placed her small hand over Noah's fist. You're safe now. Caleb wished he could promise that, but he'd lived on the frontier long enough to know that safe was a luxury, and promises were easy to break. Finish your stew, he said instead. Then we'll figure this out. They ate in silence after that, Mila humming softly, Noah working through his bowl with single-minded focus, Caleb drinking coffee and planning. The smart thing would be to take the boy to the sheriff, let the law handle it. But the law was a 2-day ride away in Boulder, and the weather was turning. By the time they got there, the men Noah ran from might have caught up. Or the boy might freeze. No. The only sensible option was to take Noah back to the cabin, wait out the winter, then deal with authorities come spring. Sensible, Caleb thought grimly. That's what you're calling it. But he knew the truth. This wasn't about being sensible. This was about a 6-year-old girl who looked at a suffering child and saw someone worth saving. And a man who'd spent 7 years running from grief, only to find it waiting in the empty eyes of a boy no one else wanted. Outside, the first snow began to fall. They left Timber Ridge an hour before dusk, Caleb pushing the pace as much as he dared. Noah rode in front of him on the saddle, wrapped in Caleb's heavy coat, while Mila followed on her pony, chattering about the cabin and the woods and all the things she wanted to show Noah when they got home. The boy didn't respond, but Caleb felt him listening, felt the way he leaned slightly back against Caleb's chest, like he was testing whether this warmth, this safety, was real. The snow came harder as they climbed into the high country, thick flakes that turned the world white and muffled sound. Caleb knew these trails by heart, could ride them blind if he had to, but with Noah shivering in his arms and Mila's pony struggling through deepening drifts, he felt the weight of responsibility press down like the sky itself. What are you doing, Caleb? I don't know, but I'm doing it anyway. By the time the cabin came into view, a solid structure of chinked logs nestled against a granite outcrop, full dark had fallen, and the temperature had dropped so low Caleb's breath froze in his beard. He dismounted carefully, lifting Noah down first, then helping Mila. The boy's legs buckled when his feet hit the ground, and Caleb caught him before he fell. "I got you," Caleb murmured. "Come on." He half-carried Noah inside while Mila ran ahead to light the lamps. The cabin was cold. The fire had died to embers while they were gone, but it was shelter, and after the brutal ride, that was enough. Caleb set Noah in the chair closest to the hearth, then moved with practiced efficiency, building up the fire, filling the kettle, pulling out blankets. Mila helped without being asked, her small hands quick and capable as she gathered dry socks and an old shirt of Caleb's that would swallow Noah whole. "Let's get you warm," Caleb said, kneeling in front of the boy. "Can you take off those wet clothes?" Noah's hands fumbled with the buttons on his shirt, too cold and stiff to manage. Caleb brushed them aside gently and did it himself, trying not to react to what he saw. Ribs like ladder rungs, bruises in the shape of hands, scars that told stories no child should have. Rage, white-hot and sudden, surged through Caleb's chest. Whoever had done this, whoever had hurt this boy, deserved worse than the law could give them. But that was a problem for another day. Right now, the only thing that mattered was warmth. He dressed Noah in the oversized shirt and wool socks, then wrapped him in 2 thick blankets and set him closer to the fire. The boy's teeth were still chattering, his skin still gray-pale, but color was starting to return to his lips. "Better?" Caleb asked. "Yes, sir." Noah's voice was steadier now, though his eyes remained wary. "Thank you, sir." "You can call me Caleb, and you don't need to thank me for basic decency." Mila appeared with a cup of warm broth, left over from yesterday's supper, reheated over the fire. "Drink this," she ordered, her tone brooking no argument. Noah took the cup with both hands and sipped carefully. Over the rim, his eyes moved around the cabin, taking in the rough-hewn furniture, the shelves lined with books, the bearskin rug, the rifle mounted above the door, assessing, cataloging, looking for threats. "You're safe here," Caleb said quietly. "I meant what I said earlier. No one's taking you anywhere you don't want to go." "Why?" The question came out sharp, almost accusing. "Why are you helping me?" Caleb sat back on his heels, considering. He could give the easy answer, because it's the right thing to do. But this boy had been lied to enough. He deserved truth. "My daughter asked if we could buy you," Caleb said slowly. "And I realized I've spent the last 7 years trying not to care about anything beyond these 4 walls, trying to keep the world small and manageable, but you can't do that when a child asks you a question that matters." He paused. "I had a brother once, Jacob. He died when he was about your age, and I couldn't save him. Maybe I can't save you either, but I can give you a warm place to sleep and food to eat, and that's a start." Noah stared at him for a long moment, something unreadable flickering across his face. Then, so quietly Caleb almost missed it. "No one ever helped before." "Well," Caleb said, his throat tight, "someone's helping now." The fire crackled. Outside, wind howled through the pines and snow piled against the windows. But inside the cabin, 3 people sat in silence, not comfortable yet, but not hostile either. It was something. Mila yawned, her head drooping. "Bedtime," Caleb announced, standing. He looked at Noah. "You can sleep in the loft. It's warm up there, and there's extra blankets." "I can sleep on the floor," Noah said quickly. "Don't want to be trouble." "You're not trouble, and the floor's too cold." Caleb pointed toward the ladder. "Go on. Mila will show you." Mila took Noah's hand, the gesture so natural, so trusting, it made Caleb's chest ache, and led him toward the ladder. Noah climbed slowly, his movements still stiff from cold and hunger, and disappeared into the loft. Caleb stood alone in the firelight, listening to the soft murmur of Mila's voice as she showed Noah where to sleep, how to arrange the blankets, where the chamber pot was. She had her mother's kindness, that girl. Her mother's unshakable belief that people were fundamentally good, even when the world tried to prove otherwise. Caleb had stopped believing that a long time ago. But tonight, watching his daughter care for a boy the world had discarded, he felt something shift, like ice breaking on a frozen river, slow and dangerous and inevitable. He poured himself more coffee, though he knew he wouldn't sleep tonight anyway. Too much to think about, too many questions without answers. What if the men Noah ran from came looking? What if the law got involved? What if this boy, with his haunted eyes and careful silences, broke Caleb's heart the way Jacob had? Too late, a voice whispered. You're already in too deep. Upstairs, he heard Mila say goodnight, heard her footsteps on the ladder. She appeared a moment later, rubbing her eyes. Is Noah going to stay, Daddy? Caleb pulled her into his arms, held her close. For now, we'll see. I hope he stays forever. She yawned again, burrowing against his chest. I like him. I know, sweetheart. Do you like him? That was harder to answer. Liking implied connection, and connection led to loss. But he couldn't lie to Mila. I think he needs us. And maybe we need him too. That seemed to satisfy her. Caleb carried her to her small room off the main cabin, tucked her under quilts his wife had made, and kissed her forehead. Sleep tight. You too, Daddy. But Caleb didn't sleep. He sat by the fire, rifle across his lap, and kept watch. Because somewhere out there, in the dark and the snow, men were looking for a boy who'd had the courage to run. And Caleb Rowan, who'd spent 7 years avoiding trouble, had just invited it straight into his home. The fire burned low, the wind howled, and upstairs a child who'd never known safety finally closed his eyes and let himself rest. Morning came reluctant and gray, the kind of dawn that barely bothered to lighten the sky. Caleb woke in the chair by the hearth, his back stiff and his neck protesting the night spent upright. The fire had died to ash, and frost had crept across the inside of the window panes in delicate, merciless patterns. He stood slowly, working the kinks from his shoulders, and listened. The cabin was silent except for the wind still worrying at the eaves. No sound from the loft. No movement from Mila's room. Good. Let them sleep. The world would still be there when they woke. Caleb rebuilt the fire with practiced hands, coaxing flame from ember, adding kindling until the blaze caught and held. Then he moved to the kitchen corner and started breakfast. Cornmeal mush, salt pork, coffee strong enough to strip paint. Simple food, but there was plenty of it, and that was what mattered. He was stirring the pot when he heard the creak of the ladder, turned to see Noah descending, moving careful and quiet like he was trying not to disturb the air itself. The boy wore the oversized shirt Caleb had given him last night, sleeves rolled up 6 times, hem hanging past his knees. His hair stuck up in dark tufts, and his eyes were puffy with sleep, or maybe from crying when no one could hear. Morning, Caleb said, keeping his voice low. Noah froze halfway down, one hand gripping the ladder rung white-knuckled. Morning, sir. Told you last night. It's Caleb. Yes, sir. I mean, Caleb. The name came out uncertain, like Noah wasn't sure he had permission to use it. You sleep all right? Noah reached the floor and stood there, hands at his sides, looking like he was waiting for orders. Yes, sir. Good. Caleb gestured toward the table. Sit. Breakfast will be ready soon. The boy hesitated, then moved to the table and lowered himself into a chair like he expected it to collapse beneath him. He sat with perfect stillness, hands folded in his lap, eyes tracking Caleb's every movement. You can relax, Caleb said. This isn't the army. No response, just that careful, watchful silence. Caleb dished up 2 bowls of mush, poured coffee for himself and milk for Noah, and brought everything to the table. He set a bowl in front of the boy and sat down across from him. Go ahead. Noah picked up his spoon but didn't eat. Should I wait for Mila? The question caught Caleb off guard, its thoughtfulness, its consideration. She'll sleep another hour at least. Girl could sleep through cannon fire. He nodded at the bowl. Eat. There's plenty. This time Noah obeyed, eating with the same methodical control as last night. Not rushing, not gorging, but steady and deliberate, like he was afraid the food would disappear if he took it for granted. They ate in silence for a while. The only sounds, the scrape of spoons against bowls and the pop of sap in the fireplace. Caleb watched the boy from beneath lowered brows, cataloging details. The way Noah sat, spine straight, shoulders tense, The way his eyes never stopped moving, checking exits, measuring distances. The way he held his spoon like a weapon, ready to defend even a bowl of mush. This wasn't just hunger and cold. This was something deeper, something that left marks you couldn't see. Noah, Caleb said carefully, those men you mentioned, the ones who will be looking. Tell me about them. The spoon stilled. Noah's jaw tightened, and for a moment Caleb thought he wouldn't answer. Then quietly, they run a work camp, north of here, maybe 2 days' ride. Take in orphans, runaways, kids nobody wants. Say they're giving us food and shelter. But they're not. No, sir. Noah's voice went flat, empty. They work us dawn to dark, logging mostly, cutting timber, hauling loads. If you're too slow or too weak, they don't feed you. And if you try to run, he trailed off, but his hand moved unconsciously to his ribs, where Caleb had seen the bruises last night. Rage, hot and immediate, flooded Caleb's veins. He forced it down, kept his voice level. How many kids? 20, maybe. Hard to keep count. Some die. New ones come. And the men running it? 3. Hackett's in charge. Then there's Boone and Cray. They're mean, but Hackett's worse. Noah's voice cracked. He likes hurting us, says it builds character. Caleb's hand tightened around his coffee cup until his knuckles went white. He wanted to ask more, wanted names, locations, details he could use. But the boy's face had gone pale, and his breathing had turned shallow. All right, Caleb said quietly. That's enough for now. Noah looked up, surprised. You're not sending me back? Not a chance in hell. The words came out harder than Caleb intended, but he meant every syllable. You're staying here, long as you need. Understand? Something flickered in Noah's eyes. Hope, maybe, or disbelief. Why would you do that? You don't even know me. Caleb set down his cup, leaned back in his chair. My brother Jacob died when I was 12. Scarlet fever. We lived on a hardscrabble farm outside St. Louis, and my father was too proud to ask for help until it was too late. He met Noah's gaze. I watched my brother suffer, and I couldn't do a damned thing about it. I was just a kid myself. But I swore then that if I ever had the chance to help someone who needed it, I would. So here we are. Noah stared at him, searching for the lie, the catch, the price. When he didn't find it, his shoulders dropped an inch, and his voice came out small. I don't want to be trouble. You already said that, and I already told you you're not trouble. You're a kid who got dealt a rotten hand, and now you're getting a better one. That's all. What if they come looking? Then they'll have to go through me. Caleb said it simple, like he was discussing the weather, but there was iron underneath, and Noah heard it. The boy's throat worked. Thank you. Finish your breakfast. They ate the rest of the meal in a different kind of silence, still wary, still fragile, but with something else woven through it. Something that might, given time, turn into trust. When Mila finally emerged from her room, hair tangled, nightdress wrinkled, smile bright as morning, the whole cabin seemed to lighten. Noah! She crossed to the table and climbed into the chair beside him, like they'd known each other for years. Did you sleep good? I put extra blankets up there because Daddy says the loft gets cold, but I think it's cozy, don't you? Are you warm enough? Did Daddy make breakfast? Is there more? Breathe, sweetheart, Caleb said, but he was smiling. Mila grinned at him, then turned back to Noah. We're going to have so much fun today. I'll show you the barn and the chickens and the creek, except the creek is probably frozen, but that's okay because frozen is fun too, and… Mila, Caleb's tone was gentle but firm. Let the boy eat. She subsided, but only barely, practically vibrating with excitement. Noah looked at her like he wasn't sure what to make of this small whirlwind of energy and enthusiasm, like he'd never met anyone who was happy to see him before. After breakfast, Caleb bundled both children in coats and scarves and sent them outside while he cleaned up. Through the window, he watched Mila drag Noah toward the barn, talking nonstop, gesturing wildly. Noah followed a step behind, hands shoved in his pockets. But Caleb saw the way the boy's head turned, tracking everything, the trees, the mountains, the paths leading away from the cabin. Still looking for threats, still ready to run. That would take time to unlearn. if it could be unlearned at all. Caleb finished the dishes and was reaching for his coat when he heard the sound, faint but distinct. Hoofbeats. Multiple horses, moving slow through the snow. His blood went cold. He crossed to the window and looked out. 3 riders were coming up the trail, dark shapes against white landscape. They rode like men who knew where they were going, and Caleb had lived on the frontier long enough to recognize trouble when it came calling. He grabbed his rifle from above the door, checked the load, then stepped outside. The cold hit him like a fist, but he barely felt it. He was focused on the riders, now close enough that he could make out details. Heavy coats, wide-brimmed hats, faces hard as the winter itself. They reined in 20 feet from the cabin. The man in the middle, broad-shouldered and thick-necked, leaned forward in his saddle. "Morning," he said, his voice carrying easy across the snow. "Name's Hackett. These are my associates, Boone and Cray." Caleb didn't lower the rifle. "What can I do for you?" Hackett smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We're looking for a boy, about 8 years old, dark hair, skinny, ran off from our camp 3 days back, thought he might have come this way." "This is private property," Caleb said evenly, "and I haven't seen any runaways." "That's so." Hackett's gaze drifted past Caleb toward the barn, where Mila's laughter rang out clear and bright. "Sounds like you got kids here." "Just my daughter." "Mind if we take a look around?" "Won't take but a minute." "I do mind, and I'm asking you to leave." The smile vanished from Hackett's face. "Now hold on. That boy is our responsibility. We took him in when nobody else would, gave him food and shelter, and he repaid us by stealing and running off. That makes him a thief, and we got every right to bring him back." "You got no rights on my land," Caleb said, his voice dropping into something colder, harder. "And I'm done being polite. Turn around, ride out, don't come back." Boone, a wiry man with a scar down his cheek, spat into the snow. "Big talk for one man alone." "I'm not alone." Caleb shifted the rifle slightly, making sure they saw it. "I got 30 shots in this Spencer, and I don't miss. You want to test that, go ahead." Hackett studied him, eyes narrowed, calculating, weighing whether this mountain man was bluffing or whether he'd actually pull the trigger. The silence stretched thin and dangerous. Then Hackett raised a hand. "Easy now, we're just trying to get our property back." "He's not property, he's a child. He's a ward of our camp, and the law says, the law's 2 days from here, and winter's settling in hard. By the time you fetch a sheriff, spring will have come and gone." Caleb's finger rested easy on the trigger. "So here's how this is going to work. You're going to ride off my land, and if I see you again, I won't bother with warnings." Hackett's jaw clenched. "You're making a mistake. That's my business." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Hackett jerked his reins, turning his horse. "Let's go." The 3 men rode back the way they'd come, but slowly, like they wanted Caleb to know this wasn't over, just postponed. Caleb stood in the snow, rifle ready, until they disappeared into the trees. Even then, he waited another 5 minutes, watching, listening, making sure. Finally, he lowered the rifle and turned back toward the barn. Mila stood in the doorway, Noah tucked behind her, both of them pale. "Daddy?" Mila's voice was small, scared. "Who were those men?" "Nobody important." Caleb crossed to them, knelt down. "But I need you both to listen to me. Those men might come back. So from now on, nobody goes outside alone. Nobody wanders past the tree line. And if you see riders coming, you get inside and you stay inside. Understand?" Mila nodded solemnly. Noah didn't move, didn't speak. His face had gone blank, not scared exactly, resigned, like he'd expected this. "Noah." Caleb waited until the boy met his eyes. "I meant what I said. They're not taking you. I don't care what they claim or who they bring. You're staying here." "They won't give up," Noah whispered. "Hackett never gives up." "Neither do I." Caleb stood, rifle still in hand. "Come on, let's get back inside." They spent the rest of the day in the cabin. Caleb kept the rifle close and stayed near the windows, watching the trails. Mila tried to maintain her earlier cheerfulness, chattering about stories and games, but the shadow of those 3 riders hung heavy over everything. Noah retreated into silence. He sat by the fire, knees drawn up, staring at the flames like they held answers. Caleb wanted to say something reassuring, something that would chase the fear from the boy's eyes, but he'd never been good with words. Sarah had been the talker, the comforter. Caleb just knew how to work, to provide, to protect. So he did what he could. He made sure the doors were barred. He loaded extra rifles and set them within reach. He checked the ammunition stores and sharpened his hunting knife until the edge could split a hair. Evening came early, the way it did in winter mountains. Caleb lit the lamps and started supper: venison stew, biscuits, canned peaches Mila had been saving for a special occasion. "Is today special?" she'd asked when he opened the jar. "Every day you're safe and warm is special," Caleb had replied, and she'd nodded like she understood. They ate together at the table, the three of them, and this time Noah sat a little less rigidly, ate a little less carefully, like maybe he was starting to believe this wasn't temporary. After supper, Mila pulled out a battered book of fairy tales and convinced Noah to sit with her on the bearskin rug while she read aloud. Her voice rose and fell with the drama of the stories, and though Noah didn't speak, Caleb saw him lean in, saw his eyes track the pictures, saw something soften in his expression. Caleb sat in his chair, pretending to repair a bridle while he watched them. His daughter and this broken boy, sitting in firelight, sharing stories. 7 years ago, he couldn't have imagined this. 7 years ago, he'd thought his life was over, that everything worth having had been buried with Sarah. But here was Mila, growing up brave and kind despite losing her mother. And here was Noah, learning what safety felt like for maybe the first time. And here was Caleb, realizing that the walls he'd built to keep grief out had also kept everything else out. He'd been surviving, not living, just surviving. Maybe it was time to do more than that. When Mila finally yawned and rubbed her eyes, Caleb closed the book and sent her to bed. She hugged Noah goodnight, quick and fierce, then hugged her father twice as long. "I love you, Daddy." "Love you too, sweetheart." After she was gone, Caleb looked at Noah. "You should get some sleep too." "Can I ask you something first?" "Sure." Noah hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "When those men came today, you could have given me back. Would have been easier, safer. Why didn't you?" Caleb set down the bridle, leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. "You know what I learned when Jacob died? That standing by while someone suffers, even if it's easier, even if it's safer, that's a choice. And it's the wrong choice." He met Noah's eyes. "I'm not saying I'm some kind of hero. I'm just a man trying to do right. And giving you back to men who hurt you, that's not right, not by a long shot." Noah's throat worked. "What if they come back with the sheriff? What if the law says I have to go? Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But until then, you're staying, not because I own you or because you owe me, but because every kid deserves a place where they're not scared all the time." Caleb paused. "You ever had that, Noah? A place where you felt safe?" The boy shook his head slowly, and the admission seemed to cost him something. "Well, you do now." Caleb stood, stretched. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we'll start teaching you about the land, the animals, how things work up here. You're part of this place now. Might as well learn your way around." Noah climbed the ladder to the loft without another word, but when he reached the top, he looked back down. "Caleb? Yeah? Thank you for—" He trailed off, unable to finish. "I know," Caleb said quietly. "Get some rest." After the boy disappeared, Caleb sat alone in the firelight, thinking about choices and consequences. He'd made a decision today, standing up to Hackett, claiming Noah as his responsibility. That decision would have ramifications. Men like Hackett didn't forgive defiance. They'd be back, probably with more men, maybe with legal papers, definitely with threats. Caleb should have been worried, should have been second-guessing himself. Instead, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Like the 7 years he'd spent hiding in these mountains had been preparation for this exact moment, for this exact choice. He checked the doors one more time, banked the fire, and finally allowed himself to rest. But he slept light, the way soldiers did in hostile territory. One ear always listening, one hand always close to the rifle. Because winter had settled over the mountains in earnest now, and with it came the long dark months where anything could happen. Where 3 men with bad intentions could wait for their moment. Where a boy's past could come clawing its way back. But they'd face it together. The mountain man, his daughter, and the child nobody else wanted, and if trouble came knocking again, it would find Caleb Rowan ready. The fire burned low. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering tracks, burying secrets, making the world clean and white and new. Inside, 3 people slept under one roof. Not yet a family, perhaps, but something close, something worth fighting for. And in the loft, Noah dreamed of safety for the first time in memory, while below, a man who'd lost everything kept watch over the fragile, unexpected gift the world had dropped at his feet. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that surprised Caleb with its ease. He woke before dawn each morning to tend the fire and start breakfast, and by the time gray light filtered through the frost-rimmed windows, both children would be stirring. Mila came down cheerful and chattering, while Noah descended the ladder quiet and careful, still moving like he expected the world to turn hostile without warning. But slowly, so slowly Caleb almost missed it, the boy began to change. On the 3rd morning, Noah asked if he could help with the chores. Caleb handed him a bucket and showed him how to break the ice on the water barrel, how to scatter feed for the chickens, how to stack firewood so it wouldn't topple. The boy worked with fierce concentration, like he was afraid of making mistakes, but he learned fast and remembered everything. "You're a good worker," Caleb said, watching Noah carry an armload of wood that was almost too heavy for him. Noah ducked his head, embarrassed. "Had a lot of practice." "Well, here you work because it needs doing, not because someone will hurt you if you don't. Understand the difference?" The boy nodded, but his eyes said he didn't quite believe it yet. By the end of the first week, the snow had piled 3 feet deep around the cabin, and the temperature had dropped so low that water froze in the kettle if you left it too close to the door. Caleb kept them busy with indoor work, mending harnesses, oiling traps, sorting through the stores to see what they had and what they'd need come spring. Mila appointed herself Noah's teacher, showing him her collection of rocks and bird feathers, reading to him from her small library of books, teaching him a card game their mother had taught her. Noah listened more than he spoke, but Caleb noticed the way the boy's shoulders gradually relaxed when Mila was near, the way something almost like a smile would flicker across his face when she laughed. It was on the 8th day that everything changed. Caleb was outside splitting wood, working up a sweat despite the cold, when he heard the sound. A shout, distant but clear, coming from the direction of the creek. Then Mila's voice, high and panicked. "Daddy! Daddy! Help!" He dropped the axe and ran, boots pounding through the snow, heart slamming against his ribs. The creek was a 1/4 mile from the cabin, down a slope thick with pine. He crashed through the trees, branches whipping at his face, following the sound of Mila's cries. He burst into the clearing and saw them, both children on the frozen creek, Mila on her hands and knees near the bank, Noah 20 feet out on the ice. And the ice was cracking, a spiderweb of fractures spreading from where the boy stood frozen in terror. "Don't move!" Caleb shouted, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. Noah's eyes locked on his, wide with fear. "I can't! The ice!" Another crack, loud as a gunshot. The fractures spread wider. Caleb's mind raced. The ice was thin this close to where the spring fed in, warmer water keeping it from freezing solid. If Noah went through, the current would take him under, and they'd never get him out in time. "Mila, get back to solid ground, now!" His daughter scrambled backward, tears streaming down her face. "I told him not to go out there. I told him—" "It's all right, sweetheart. Just stay back." Caleb kept his voice calm, even though his pulse was hammering. He looked at Noah. "Listen to me. You're going to be fine, but you need to do exactly what I say. Can you do that?" Noah nodded, his whole body trembling. "Good. I need you to get down on your belly. Spread your weight out." The boy dropped carefully, moving so slow Caleb could hear every breath. The ice groaned but held. "Now I'm going to come out there and get you, but I need you to stay absolutely still. Don't move. Don't even breathe hard. Understand?" "Yes, sir." Caleb looked around, spotted a fallen pine branch thick as his arm. He grabbed it and tested its weight, then lowered himself onto the ice at the creek's edge. The cold bit through his clothes immediately, but he ignored it. Spreading his weight like he'd told Noah, he began inching forward, pushing the branch ahead of him. The ice protested with every movement, creaking and popping, but Caleb kept going. 10 feet, 15, The fractures were all around him now, dark lines in the white surface, each one a promise of disaster. "Daddy, please be careful," Mila called from the bank, her voice breaking. "I got this, sweetheart. Don't worry." But Caleb was worried. Terrified, actually. Not for himself. He'd made peace with his own mortality years ago, but for what would happen to these children if he went through. Mila would try to help and might fall in herself. And Noah, already half convinced the world wanted him dead, would see it as proof. So Caleb moved with agonizing slowness, distributing his weight, reading the ice like he'd read 1,000 trails. 20 feet out now. Close enough to see the stark terror on Noah's face, the way the boy's lips had gone blue. "Almost there, son. Hang on." Another crack, this one directly beneath Caleb. He felt the ice sag, felt freezing water seep through his coat. But it held. Barely. "I'm going to slide this branch to you," Caleb said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his throat. "Grab on tight, with both hands." He pushed the branch forward. Noah's hands shot out and clamped around it like a lifeline. "Good. Now I'm going to pull you toward me. Keep your belly on the ice. Let yourself slide." Caleb began pulling, slow and steady. Noah came inch by inch, the boy's face pressed against the ice, eyes squeezed shut. The fractures spread with every movement, racing across the surface like lightning, but Caleb kept pulling. 10 feet. 5. Close enough now that Caleb could grab Noah's coat. "I got you," Caleb said, and hauled the boy against his chest. "Now we move together. Stay flat." They crawled backward, two bodies moving as one, while the ice screamed beneath them. Caleb could feel it giving way, could hear water gurgling through the cracks. 10 more feet. 5. Then they were on solid ice near the bank, and Caleb was lifting Noah, carrying him the last few yards to shore. Mila threw her arms around both of them, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. "It's okay," Caleb murmured, holding them both. "We're okay. Everyone's okay." But Noah wasn't okay. The boy was shaking so violently Caleb could hear his teeth chattering, and his skin had gone gray-white. Hypothermia was setting in fast. "We need to get him warm. Now!" Caleb scooped Noah into his arms and started running back toward the cabin, Mila scrambling to keep up. The boy weighed almost nothing, all bone and sinew, and Caleb ran flat out, ignoring the burn in his lungs. He kicked open the cabin door and went straight to the fire, laying Noah on the bearskin rug as close to the flames as he dared. The boy's whole body was convulsing now, his lips purple, his breathing shallow and rapid. "Mila, get every blanket we have. Move!" She ran. Caleb stripped Noah's wet clothes off, throwing them aside, then wrapped the boy in his own dry coat while he waited for the blankets. When Mila came staggering under an armload of quilts, Caleb bundled Noah in them, layer after layer, then pulled the boy onto his lap and held him tight, using his own body heat to warm him. "Stay with me, Noah. You hear me? Stay with me." The boy's eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm sorry. I just wanted—" "Shh. Don't talk. Just breathe." Mila knelt beside them, her small hand stroking Noah's hair. "You're going to be okay. Daddy saved you. You're going to be okay." For the next hour, Caleb held the boy and willed warmth back into his frozen body. He'd seen hypothermia before, knew how quickly it could kill, but gradually, slowly, Noah's shaking began to ease. Color crept back into his lips. His breathing steadied. "That's it," Caleb murmured. "That's it, son. You're doing fine." When Noah's eyes finally focused, really focused, they were full of tears. "I didn't mean to go on the ice, Mila said she used to walk across in the summer, and I wanted to see if I could—" "It's all right." "No, it's not," Noah's voice cracked. "I could have gotten killed. I could have gotten you killed. I'm nothing but trouble, just like Hackett said. You should have left me in town. You should have—" "Stop," Caleb's voice cut through the spiral of self-recrimination. "You made a mistake. Kids make mistakes. That doesn't make you trouble, and it sure as hell doesn't make you worthless." But you didn't. And you know why? Because you listened when I told you what to do. You stayed calm when it mattered. That takes courage, Noah." The boy stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. "Courage? Damn right. Most people panic when they're scared. You didn't. You trusted me, and you did what needed doing. Caleb pulled the blankets tighter. That's not trouble. That's strength. Noah's face crumpled, and then he was crying, deep, wrenching sobs that shook his whole frame. Caleb just held him, letting it out, while Mila pressed close and wrapped her small arms around them both. I was so scared, Noah choked out between sobs. I thought I was going to die. I thought... But you didn't die. You're right here, and you're safe. Why do you keep saving me? Why do you care? Caleb closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the question. When he answered, his voice was rough. Because 7 years ago, I lost everyone I loved. My wife died, and I came up here to these mountains thinking if I just stayed away from people, I'd never hurt like that again. But you know what I learned? Shutting yourself off from caring doesn't stop the pain, it just makes you empty. He looked down at Noah's tear-stained face. You and Mila, you're filling that empty space. And maybe I'm supposed to fill some empty spaces for you too. Maybe that's how this works. Noah buried his face against Caleb's chest and cried harder, and Caleb let him. Let 7 or 8 years of fear and pain and loneliness pour out in that firelit cabin while the winter wind howled outside. Mila cried too, quiet tears that she wiped away with her sleeve. And if Caleb's own eyes were wet, well, there wasn't anyone there to judge him for it. Eventually the tears stopped. Noah's breathing evened out and his body went limp with exhaustion. Caleb carried him to the loft and tucked him into bed with extra blankets, then came back down to find Mila still sitting by the fire, hugging her knees. Is he going to be all right, Daddy? He'll be fine. Just needs rest and warmth. I shouldn't have told him about the creek. It's my fault. Caleb sat beside her and pulled her into his arms. It's nobody's fault. Accidents happen. What matters is how we handle them. She was quiet for a long moment, then whispered, I was so scared when I saw him on the ice. I thought we were going to lose him. So was I, sweetheart. So was I. I don't want to lose him, Daddy. I like having him here. Is that okay? Caleb kissed the top of her head. It's more than okay. It's good. Do you think he'll stay, even after what happened? I don't know, but we'll make sure he knows he's wanted, whether he stays or goes. Fair enough? Mila nodded against his chest, and they sat together in the firelight until her breathing deepened, and she fell asleep. Caleb carried her to her room, then returned to the main cabin and sat alone with his thoughts. The incident on the ice had shaken something loose in him. For years, he'd been so focused on protecting Mila from more loss that he'd forgotten children needed more than just safety. They needed to know they mattered, that their presence made a difference. Noah mattered, not because Caleb pitied him or felt obligated to help him, but because in the 10 days since they'd found him at that winter market, the boy had become part of the fabric of their lives. His quiet presence at breakfast, his careful questions, his slow-blooming smiles when Mila made him laugh, all of it had woven itself into the pattern of their days. And today, when Caleb had crawled out onto that cracking ice, it hadn't been duty driving him forward. It had been fear. Raw, visceral fear of losing someone who'd started to matter. That was dangerous. Caring was dangerous. But Caleb was starting to think maybe dangerous was better than empty. He was still sitting there, staring into the flames, when he heard movement from the loft. Footsteps on the ladder. Noah appeared, wrapped in a blanket, hair sticking up in all directions. Can't sleep? Caleb asked. The boy shook his head and came to sit on the floor by the fire. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Noah said quietly, At the camp, when kids made mistakes, Hackett would lock them in the shed overnight. No food, no blankets. Said it taught us to be more careful. Caleb's jaw tightened. That's not teaching. That's cruelty. I know that now. But back then, I thought that's just how the world worked. That if you messed up, you got punished. So when I went through the ice today, I kept waiting for you to be angry, to tell me I was stupid, to lock me out or send me away. That's never going to happen. Noah looked at him, eyes searching. How do you know? What if I do something worse? What if... Noah, Caleb leaned forward. Listen to me. Making mistakes is part of being human, part of learning. What happened today was scary, but it doesn't change anything. You're still welcome here. You're still wanted here. Nothing you do is going to change that. You say that now, but But nothing. I'm not Hackett. This isn't a work camp where you earn your keep by being perfect. This is a home, and in a home, people mess up, and people forgive, and people move on. That's how it works. Noah pulled the blanket tighter. I've never had a home before. Not a real one. You do now. If you want it. The boy was silent for a long moment, then asked in a voice barely above a whisper, "What if those men come back? What if they make you give me up?" They won't. But what if... Noah... Caleb reached out and put a hand on the boy's shoulder. I stood up to those men once. I'll do it again and again, as many times as it takes, because you're not property. You're a kid who deserves better than what the world's given you so far. And I'm not letting anyone, not Hackett, not the law, not anyone, take you away from here unless that's what you want. Understand? Noah's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were different. Not the desperate, broken tears from earlier. These were something else, something that looked almost like hope. I want to stay, he whispered. If you'll let me. Then you stay. For how long? Caleb smiled, tired but genuine. How about we start with forever and see how that goes? Noah stared at him like he wasn't sure he'd heard right. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. Small and tentative, but real. The first real smile Caleb had seen from him. Forever sounds good, Noah said. They sat together by the fire until the boy's eyes started drooping, then Caleb sent him back to bed. But before Noah climbed the ladder, he turned back. Caleb, thank you for today, for everything. Get some sleep, son. The word son hung in the air between them for a heartbeat. Then Noah smiled again and climbed the ladder, and Caleb was alone. But not empty. Not anymore. The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold. Caleb woke to find both children already up, sitting at the table whispering together. When they saw him, they fell silent, exchanging guilty looks. What are you two plotting? Caleb asked, reaching for the coffee pot. Nothing, Mila said too quickly. Nothing, Noah echoed, but he was grinning. Caleb raised an eyebrow, but let it go. He had chores to do, and whatever mischief they were planning couldn't be too terrible. Probably. He spent the morning checking the trap line, breaking ice on the water troughs, and making sure the livestock had enough feed to get through the next cold snap. When he returned to the cabin around midday, stamping snow from his boots, he found the children had been busy. The cabin had been cleaned, swept and straightened with the kind of manic energy only kids could manage. The table was set with Mila's best dishes, the ones that had been her mother's, and in the center sat a lopsided cake made from cornmeal and molasses, decorated with pine needles arranged to spell out a word. Family. Caleb stopped in the doorway, throat tight. We made you a cake, Mila announced, bouncing on her toes. Well, Noah made it. I just helped with the decorating. It's probably not very good, Noah added quickly. I've never made a cake before, but Mila said we should do something to say thank you for yesterday, and it's perfect, Caleb interrupted, his voice rougher than he intended. Both of you. This is perfect. They ate the cake for lunch. It was dense and barely sweet, but it was the best thing Caleb had tasted in years. Because it wasn't just cake. It was an offering, a declaration, a promise that they were in this together, whatever came next. After lunch, Caleb gathered them both at the table. I've been thinking, he said carefully. What happened yesterday on the ice scared me, made me realize I've been treating this like temporary. Like maybe come spring, things would go back to how they were, but I don't want that. And I don't think you do either. Noah's eyes went wide. What are you saying? I'm saying when spring comes, we ride down to Boulder together. We talk to a judge, we file the right papers, and we make this official, legal. So if Hackett or anyone else comes sniffing around, they've got no claim. You'd be my son, for real, if that's what you want. The boy's mouth opened and closed, no words coming out. Mila grabbed his hand and squeezed. Say yes, Noah. Say yes. Noah's voice cracked. You'd really do that? Adopt me. Already told you. Forever starts now. Noah launched himself at Caleb so hard he nearly knocked the chair over. The boy wrapped his arms around Caleb's neck and held on like he'd never let go. Yes, he choked out. Yes, please. I want that. I want... He couldn't finish, but he didn't need to. Caleb held him tight, one hand on Mila's head as she pressed close to both of them. And in that moment, surrounded by these two children, Caleb felt something he hadn't felt since Sarah died. Whole. Like all the broken pieces had finally found a way to fit back together. The rest of the day passed in a kind of glowing contentment. They worked together on simple tasks, mending a harness, sorting beans, oiling the rifle. But everything felt different now. Lighter. Like a weight had been lifted from all of them. That night, after the children were in bed, Caleb stood at the window looking out at the star-strewn sky. The mountains rose black against silver, and the snow caught moonlight and threw it back in a million tiny reflections. Beautiful and harsh and unforgiving. Everything he'd come to these mountains seeking. But he'd found something else too. Something he hadn't been looking for. A second chance. Not to replace what he'd lost, but to build something new. To be the father Mila needed and the father Noah had never had. To prove that even broken men could heal if they let the right people in. Behind him, he heard the ladder creak. Turned to find Noah descending, moving quiet as always. "Can't sleep again?" Caleb asked. "Just thinking." Noah came to stand beside him at the window. "Do you really think the judge will let you adopt me, even though I'm, not really yours?" "You are really mine," Caleb said firmly. "Blood's got nothing to do with it. What matters is who shows up, who stays, who chooses to love you even when it's hard." He looked down at the boy. "I'm choosing you, Noah, every day, and I'll keep choosing you for as long as you'll let me." Noah was quiet for a moment, then asked softly, "What was she like?" "Mila's mom." Caleb smiled, the old grief mixing with something sweeter now. "Sarah? She was stubborn, kind, tough as nails when she needed to be, but soft in all the ways that mattered. She would have liked you." "How do you know?" "Because she had a gift for seeing the best in people, for looking past all the broken parts and finding what was worth saving." Caleb's voice dropped. "She did it for me. Took a hard-headed, angry young man and taught him how to be gentle, how to love, how to be a father." "Do you miss her?" "Every day. But missing her doesn't mean I can't keep living. Doesn't mean I can't keep loving the people still here." He put a hand on Noah's shoulder. "Sarah's gone, but you and Mila are here, and that matters. That's enough." Noah leaned against Caleb's side, and they stood together in the quiet, watching the night. After a while, the boy said, "I'm going to make you proud. I promise. I'm going to work hard and learn everything and be—" "Noah," Caleb turned to face him. "You don't have to earn this. You don't have to prove you're worth keeping. You just have to be you. That's all I want. Just you, exactly as you are." The boy's eyes filled with tears for what felt like the 100th time that day. "I don't know how to do that. I've spent so long trying to be invisible, trying to be useful, trying to be anything except myself." "Then we'll figure it out together, all three of us. We'll make mistakes, and we'll fix them. We'll have good days and bad days, but we'll do it as a family. Deal?" Noah nodded, swiping at his eyes. "Deal. Now get back to bed. Morning comes early, and I need help fixing the barn door tomorrow." The boy climbed the ladder, but before he disappeared into the loft, he called back down softly, "Caleb, I'm glad Mila asked if we could buy me. I'm glad you said yes." "So am I, son. So am I." After Noah was gone, Caleb stood alone in the darkness for a long while. He thought about the path that had brought him here, grief and loss and years of isolation. He thought about the choices he'd made, good and bad, and he thought about the morning when Mila's innocent question had cracked open the walls he'd built and let the world back in. He'd spent 7 years running from pain, but pain, he was learning, wasn't something you could outrun. You could only walk through it. And sometimes, on the other side, you found something worth the journey. A child who needed you, a daughter who needed a brother, a family built not from blood but from choice. Caleb turned from the window and banked the fire for the night. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, wood to split, traps to check, animals to tend. And somewhere out there, Hackett and his men were probably still plotting, still searching. But let them come. Let them try to take this boy, this family, this fragile new beginning. They'd find Caleb Rowan waiting, and this time he had everything worth fighting for. Winter deepened its grip on the mountains with a vengeance that even old-timers would later call exceptional. The temperature dropped so low that trees split open in the night with sounds like gunshots, and the snow came in waves that buried the world under drifts taller than a man. Caleb had lived through hard winters before, but this one felt different, not just because of the brutal cold, but because he had more to protect now. The days fell into patterns shaped by necessity and survival. Caleb woke before dawn to break ice and tend the animals, while Noah, insisting he could help, would bundle up and follow him into the dark, learning by watching and doing. The boy had a quick mind and steady hands, and within 2 weeks he could handle most of the morning chores without supervision. Mila kept the fire going and started breakfast, her small face serious with responsibility as she stirred porridge and set the table. They worked well together, the three of them, each finding their place in the rhythm of the household. But beneath the comfortable routine, Caleb felt a constant low hum of worry. Hackett hadn't returned, but that didn't mean he'd given up. Men like that held grudges the way mountains held snow, deep and heavy, and waiting for the right moment to avalanche. It was early February when the stranger arrived. Caleb was splitting wood behind the cabin when he heard the horse. He straightened, axe in hand, and watched as a single rider emerged from the tree line, a man on a gray gelding, moving slow through the deep snow. Not Hackett or his crew. This man was older, leaner, wearing a badge that caught the weak winter sunlight. Sheriff's badge. Caleb's stomach dropped. He set the axe against the chopping block and walked around to the front of the cabin, arriving just as the rider dismounted. Up close, the man looked tired, gray stubble on his jaw, lines etched deep around his eyes, the weathered face of someone who'd spent too many years dealing with other people's problems. "Help you?" Caleb asked, keeping his voice neutral. The man pulled off his glove and extended a hand. "Name's Tom Crawford, sheriff out of Boulder. You must be Caleb Rowan." They shook, and Caleb noted the firm grip, the direct gaze. This wasn't a man who'd come looking for trouble, but he'd brought it anyway just by being here. "Long ride from Boulder in this weather," Caleb said. "That it is. Mind if I come inside? Been on the trail since before dawn, and I could use some coffee if you've got it." Caleb hesitated, then nodded. "Come on." They walked to the cabin together, and Caleb caught the sheriff's quick assessment of the place, the well-maintained structure, the neatly stacked firewood, the smoke rising straight from the chimney, noting details, filing them away. Inside, both children looked up from where they sat at the table working on arithmetic lessons. Mila's face brightened at the sight of a visitor, but Noah went pale, his body going rigid with fear. "Mila, Noah, this is Sheriff Crawford from Boulder," Caleb said calmly. "Sheriff, my daughter Mila, and this is Noah." Crawford nodded to Mila, then his eyes settled on Noah. The boy stared back, barely breathing, hands clenched in his lap. "Pleased to meet you both," Crawford said, his tone easy. Then to Caleb, "That coffee still on offer?" "Sit." Caleb gestured to the table. "Mila, pour the sheriff some coffee, would you?" While Mila moved to the stove, Caleb pulled out a chair and sat across from Crawford. Noah hadn't moved, hadn't blinked, his whole attention fixed on the badge pinned to the sheriff's coat. "You've come about the boy," Caleb said quietly. Crawford accepted the coffee from Mila with a nod of thanks, took a sip, then set the cup down. "I have. Got a complaint filed about 3 weeks back. Man named Hackett claims you're harboring a runaway who's legally bound to his work camp. Says the boy stole supplies and money when he left." "That's a lie," Noah said suddenly, his voice sharp. "I never stole nothing. I just ran." "Easy, son," Caleb said, then looked at Crawford. "Hackett runs a labor camp north of here. Takes in orphans and runaways, works them half to death, feeds them less than you'd feed a dog. This boy's got scars and bruises that'll tell you everything you need to know about what kind of operation it is. But—" Crawford's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "That may be true, but legally, if the boy was in Hackett's custody, and there's a binding agreement—" "There's no agreement," Caleb interrupted. "Noah's a child. He can't enter into contracts. And even if he could, you can't legally own a person in this country anymore. Last I checked, we fought a war over that. Nobody's talking about ownership, but Hackett claims he's the boy's legal guardian, appointed by a magistrate in Helena, says he has papers." "Then his papers are fraudulent," Caleb said flatly. Because Noah was abandoned at a winter market with no guardian, no family, nothing. I found him half frozen and starving. If Hackett had legal custody, he sure as hell wasn't exercising it. Noah's breathing had gone shallow and rapid. Mila moved to stand beside him, her small hand resting on his shoulder. Crawford took another sip of coffee, his eyes moving between Caleb and the boy. Look, I'm not here to drag anyone anywhere, but I need to investigate the complaint. That's the law. Then investigate, Caleb said. Ask Noah what happened. See those bruises on his arms? Those rope burns on his wrists? That's what Hackett's guardianship looks like. The sheriff turned to Noah. Son, I need you to tell me the truth. All of it. How'd you end up at Hackett's camp? Noah's hands were shaking. He looked at Caleb, who nodded encouragement, then back at Crawford. My ma died when I was 5, Noah said, his voice barely above a whisper. Fever took her. I don't remember my pa. He left before I was born. After Ma died, I lived on the streets in Helena for a while. Then Hackett found me. Said he'd give me food and a place to sleep if I worked for him. I didn't know what kind of work. What kind was it? Logging, cutting timber, hauling it to the river. We worked from sunup to sundown, sometimes longer. If you were too slow or too weak, they didn't feed you. If you complained, they beat you. Noah's voice cracked. I saw kids die there, Sheriff. Saw one boy get crushed when a tree fell wrong. Saw another freeze to death when they locked him in the shed for talking back. I couldn't stay. Crawford's jaw tightened. How long were you there? Almost 3 years. And you're how old now? 8, I think. Maybe 9. I don't know exactly. The sheriff was quiet for a long moment, then looked at Caleb. And you took him in when? December. Found him abandoned at the Timber Ridge Market. Brought him home, fed him, gave him a warm place to sleep. When Hackett showed up looking for him, I sent him packing, told him the boy was staying here. Hackett say anything about papers then? He mentioned custody. I told him it didn't matter, that Noah wasn't going back to that camp under any circumstances. Crawford rubbed his face, suddenly looking very old. This is messy, Rowan. Even if everything you're saying is true, and I'm inclined to believe it is, Hackett's got connections, got friends in the territorial government. If he pushes this, it could go all the way to a court in Helena, and that's a fight you might not win. Then what do you suggest? Caleb kept his voice level, but his hands were clenched beneath the table. I suggest we do this right. Legal. You file for custody yourself. Get it in front of a judge, let them see the condition the boy's in, hear his testimony. With the right paperwork, you could make a case that Hackett was negligent at best, abusive at worst. That'd void any guardianship he's claiming. How long would that take? Months, probably. Court doesn't convene in Boulder until April, and that's assuming the weather clears enough for travel. Crawford paused. In the meantime, I need to report back to Hackett that I found the boy. I need to tell him something. Noah made a small sound of distress, and Mila's arm went around his shoulders. Caleb leaned forward. Sheriff, I'm asking you, man to man, not lawman to civilian. What would you do? If this was your son, what would you do? Crawford met his eyes, and something passed between them. Understanding, recognition. The unspoken knowledge that sometimes the law and justice weren't the same thing. If it was my son, Crawford said slowly, I'd keep him safe. I'd keep him here, warm and fed and protected. And I'd make damn sure that when we got in front of that judge, there wasn't a question in anyone's mind about where the boy belonged. That's exactly what I plan to do. The sheriff nodded. Then here's what I'm going to tell Hackett. I'm going to say I rode up here, investigated the complaint, and found the boy in good health and good care. I'm going to say that given the severity of the weather and the remoteness of this location, it would be dangerous and potentially fatal to remove the child at this time. And I'm going to recommend that the matter be settled by the courts come spring. Relief flooded through Caleb so strong it made him dizzy. You'd do that? I'd do that. But Rowan, you need to understand, this doesn't end it. Hackett's going to fight. He's going to bring lawyers and papers and probably some bought and paid for magistrate who'll swear the boy's legally his. You're going to need your own lawyer. You're going to need witnesses who can testify to the condition Noah was in when you found him. You're going to need to prove you can provide for him, that you're fit to be his guardian. I can do all that. Good. Because if you lose this case, they'll take the boy, and there won't be anything I can do about it. Caleb glanced at Noah, saw the terror still written across the boy's face, and felt something harden in his chest. I won't lose. Crawford stood, draining the last of his coffee. I hope you're right. He looked at Noah. Son, you're in good hands here. But come spring, you're going to have to stand up in court and tell your story. All of it. Think you can do that? Noah nodded, though his face was ashen. Yes, sir. Good boy. Crawford turned back to Caleb. I'll be in touch when the court date's set. In the meantime, keep your head down. Don't give Hackett any ammunition. Caleb walked the sheriff outside to his horse. The temperature had dropped even further, and the sky was the color of old pewter, more snow coming. Crawford, Caleb said as the man swung into the saddle, why are you helping us? The sheriff looked down at him, his eyes tired but clear. Because I've got 3 kids of my own, and I've seen what men like Hackett do. Seen camps like his, seen the broken children who come out of them. If I can stop one kid from going back to that hell, then maybe I'm doing my job right for once. He gathered his reins. Take care of that boy, Rowan, and get yourself a good lawyer. Any recommendations? There's a man in Boulder, Daniel Webster, no relation to the famous one, but just as good with words. He's not cheap, but he's honest and he doesn't lose often. Tell him I sent you. Crawford rode off into the gray afternoon, and Caleb stood watching until horse and rider disappeared into the trees. Then he turned and went back inside. Noah was sitting exactly where Caleb had left him, pale and shaking. Mila hovered nearby, her eyes wide with worry. He's going to take me back, Noah whispered. Come spring, they're going to make me go back. No, they're not. Caleb crossed to the boy and knelt in front of him. Listen to me, Noah. I meant what I said before. You're staying here. We're going to fight this in court, and we're going to win. But what if we don't? What if the judge believes Hackett? Then we'll figure something else out. But it's not going to come to that. Caleb gripped Noah's shoulders gently. I know you're scared. I'd be scared too, but fear's not going to help us right now. What's going to help is preparing, making sure we have all the evidence we need, making sure you're ready to tell your story. I don't want to talk about it, Noah said, his voice breaking. I don't want to remember. I know, but sometimes the only way past something is straight through it. Caleb's voice softened. You don't have to do it alone, though. We'll be there with you, me and Mila, every step. Mila nodded fiercely. We'll tell the judge how brave you are, how hard you work, how you're part of our family now. Noah looked between them, and slowly some of the panic faded from his eyes. You really think we can win? I know we can, Caleb said with more confidence than he felt. But we're going to need help. Come spring, we're riding to Boulder together. We're going to find this lawyer Crawford mentioned, and we're going to build a case so strong that no judge in his right mind would send you back. What if Hackett comes before spring? He won't, not in this weather, and even if he tries, he'll have to go through me first. Caleb stood. Now, I need you to do something for me. I need you to write down everything you remember about that camp. Every detail. The work you did, the conditions, the other kids, what Hackett and his men did. Can you do that? Noah swallowed hard. It'll be a lot. That's all right. We've got time, and Mila can help you write it if the words get too hard. I can do that, Mila said solemnly. Over the following weeks, Noah worked on his account. He'd sit at the table with a pencil and paper, brow furrowed in concentration, writing in his careful, unpracticed hand. Sometimes he'd stop and stare into space, lost in memories. Sometimes tears would slide down his cheeks, and he'd have to put the pencil down until he could breathe again. Caleb never pushed, never demanded. He just made sure Noah knew he wasn't alone, that someone was there if the memories got too heavy. Mila helped by reading to Noah from her books when he needed a break, or by sitting beside him in companionable silence, her presence a reminder that the world held more than just pain and fear. And slowly, page by page, Noah's story took shape. The names of the other children, the descriptions of injuries and illnesses left untreated, the brutal punishments for minor infractions, the meals that were barely enough to keep them alive. All of it documented in a child's handwriting, stark and damning. Caleb read it one night after the children had gone to bed, and by the time he finished, his hands were shaking with rage. This wasn't just abuse. This was systematic cruelty, designed to break spirits and extract labor from the most vulnerable. And Hackett had been doing it for years, probably with the full knowledge of officials who'd been paid to look the other way. Well, that was ending now. One way or another, Caleb was going to make sure of it. February gave way to March, and the first hints of thaw began to appear. The days grew longer, the sun stronger. Icicles dripped from the cabin's eaves, and the snow began to shrink back from the trails. It would be weeks yet before the high passes were clear enough for travel, but spring was coming, and with it, the reckoning. Caleb used the time to prepare in other ways. He took inventory of their supplies and resources, calculating what they'd need to make the trip to Boulder and stay there long enough for the court proceedings. He wrote letters to old acquaintances from his days before the mountains, asking if anyone remembered him, if anyone might be willing to testify to his character. He also began teaching Noah and Mila together, not just reading and arithmetic, but history and geography and all the things a judge might ask to determine if he was providing proper education. The children took to the lessons with enthusiasm, Mila helping Noah with the harder concepts, Noah surprising them both with his quick understanding of mathematics. "You've got a head for numbers," Caleb observed one afternoon, watching Noah solve a problem that should have been beyond him. The boy shrugged, embarrassed. "At the camp, I used to count things, trees, logs, days. It helped me keep track of time, made me feel less lost." "Well, it's a useful skill. Keep at it." On the first truly warm day in late March, Caleb took both children outside to begin preparing the garden plot. The ground was still half frozen, but they could clear debris and plan where things would go. As they worked, Noah suddenly stopped and looked around, really looked, taking in the mountains still capped with snow, the valley spreading green below, the endless sky. "It's beautiful here," he said quietly. "That it is," Caleb agreed. "At the camp, I couldn't see anything but trees and mud. I forgot the world could be beautiful." Mila took his hand. "You won't forget again. We won't let you." Noah smiled, easier now, more natural than those first tentative attempts. "I know." That night, as Caleb was banking the fire, Noah came down from the loft. The boy had grown in the months since winter began, filling out with regular meals, gaining strength from fresh air, and good work. He looked healthier, steadier. But there was still shadow in his eyes when he spoke about the past. "Caleb, can I ask you something?" "Always." "When we go to Boulder, when we're in front of the judge, what if I freeze up? What if I can't get the words out?" Caleb set down the poker and gave Noah his full attention. "Then you take a breath, and you try again. And if you still can't, then I'll tell them for you. The important thing isn't how you say it, it's that you show up, that you're brave enough to be there." "I don't feel brave." "Bravery isn't about not being scared, son. It's about being scared and doing what needs doing anyway. You've already done that. You ran from Hackett. You survived on your own until we found you. You stood up to your fear when that sheriff came." Caleb moved to sit beside Noah. "You're one of the bravest people I know." Noah was quiet for a moment. "What if we lose? What if the judge says I have to go back?" It was the question Caleb had been dreading, because he didn't have a good answer. The law was supposed to be fair, but he'd seen too much to trust it blindly. But he couldn't let Noah see his doubt. "If that happens," Caleb said carefully, "then we'll have to make some hard choices. But I promise you this, I won't let them take you without a fight, and I mean that in every sense of the word." Noah's eyes went wide. You'd break the law for me?" "I'd do whatever it took to keep you safe, law or no law." The boy's throat worked, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. Nobody's ever done that for me before." "Well, I am, and I will, for as long as you need me to." Noah threw his arms around Caleb, holding on tight, and Caleb held him back. They stayed that way for a long time, while the fire crackled and the wind whispered through the pines outside. When Noah finally pulled away, his eyes were red, but his expression was determined. "I'm going to be ready. When we go to court, I'm going to tell them everything. I'm going to make sure they understand what Hackett did, what he's still doing to those other kids." "That's my boy," Caleb said, and meant it with his whole heart. The next morning, Caleb woke to find the world transformed. Overnight, the temperature had surged, and the snow was melting so fast you could hear it, water rushing in streams, dripping from branches, carving new paths through the mud. Spring had arrived in earnest, which meant it was time. Pack your things, Caleb told the children over breakfast. Light as you can, one change of clothes each, your warmest coats. We leave for Boulder in 3 days. Mila's eyes lit up with excitement, but Noah's face went pale. 3 days? The boy whispered. The passes are clearing. If we wait much longer, the spring rains will turn the trails to soup. We need to move while we can. But what about the animals, the cabin? I'll arrange for old Marcus down in Timber Ridge to check on things while we're gone. Everything here will be fine. Caleb leaned forward. It's time, Noah. Time to make this official. Time to make sure you're really and truly ours. Noah nodded, but his hands were shaking. I'm scared. So am I, Caleb admitted. But we're doing this together. And whatever happens, we face it as a family. The word hung in the air, family. Not just a concept anymore, but a living reality. A promise that had been forged in fire and cold and fear, but had come out stronger for it. Together, Noah repeated, and this time his voice was steady. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Caleb packed supplies, checked their route, made arrangements with neighbors. Mila organized their clothes and packed her most precious belongings, her mother's Bible, a carved wooden horse Caleb had made her, and the letters Noah had written. Noah mostly stayed quiet, working through his fear by keeping his hands busy, helping wherever he could. On the evening before they were set to leave, Caleb gathered them both by the fire one last time. I want you to know, he said, looking at each of them in turn, that no matter what happens in Boulder, nothing changes between us. You're my children, both of you. That's not dependent on what some judge says or what papers we file. It's just the truth. But the papers will help, right? Mila asked anxiously. They'll help. They'll make it so nobody can question it. But with or without them, you're mine and I'm yours. Understand? They nodded, and Caleb pulled them close, one on each side. Outside, the night was mild and full of the sounds of rushing water and new growth. Spring was here, bringing with it both hope and uncertainty, but they'd face it together. The mountain man who'd learned to love again, the little girl who'd never stopped believing in goodness, and the boy who'd survived the worst the world could offer and come out the other side still capable of trust. Whatever tomorrow brought, they'd meet it as they'd met every challenge so far. As a family. They left at first light, 3 riders heading down the mountain trail under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Caleb led the way on his sturdy roan, with Mila on her pony and Noah riding double behind Caleb, his thin arms wrapped tight around the man's waist. The snow had retreated to the highest peaks, leaving the trails muddy but passable, and everywhere there were signs of spring, birdsong in the aspens, wildflowers pushing through last year's dead grass, the sharp green smell of new growth. It should have been a hopeful journey, but tension rode with them like a fourth companion. Noah barely spoke, his face pressed against Caleb's back, and even Mila's usual chatter was subdued. They all knew what waited at the end of this trail. The ride to Boulder took 2 full days, camping overnight in a grove of cottonwoods where a creek ran clear and cold. Caleb built a fire and made a simple supper while the children spread their bedrolls. Noah moved mechanically, his mind clearly elsewhere, and when Mila tried to engage him in conversation, his responses were distant, distracted. That night, after Mila had fallen asleep, Caleb found Noah sitting by the dying fire, staring into the coals. "Can't sleep?" Caleb asked, settling beside him. "Keep thinking about tomorrow, about what comes after. We're not going to court tomorrow. First, we need to find that lawyer Crawford mentioned, get our case in order. Could be weeks before we see a judge. But it's coming, and when it does," Noah's voice trailed off. "When it does, we'll be ready. You've got your written testimony. I've got witnesses who'll speak to your condition when we found you. We've got Sheriff Crawford on our side. That's more than most people have." Noah poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the darkness. What if it's not enough? What if Hackett's got better lawyers, better papers, better lies? Then we tell the truth louder than he tells his lies. Caleb put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I know you're scared. But Noah, you're not alone anymore. You need to let that sink in. Whatever happens, you've got people fighting for you now." The boy's eyes glistened in the firelight. I just keep thinking about the other kids. The ones still at that camp. If we lose, I go back to that. But even if we win, they're still there, still suffering. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. The thought had occurred to him too, kept him awake more than one night. One battle at a time, son. First we make sure you're safe and legal. Then maybe we can do something about the rest. You mean that? I don't say things I don't mean. Noah nodded slowly, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Thank you for all of this. I know I keep saying it, but I know. Now get some sleep. Long day tomorrow. They reached Boulder late the following afternoon, riding in through streets that were half mud, half dust, crowded with wagons and people taking advantage of the good weather. The town had grown since Caleb's last visit 7 years ago. New buildings, new businesses, the raw energy of a place still figuring out what it wanted to be. Caleb found them rooms at a modest boarding house run by a woman named Mrs. Fletcher, who took one look at the children and immediately insisted on feeding them before anything else. Over plates of roast chicken and potatoes, she chattered about the town, the weather, the scandals and gossip, barely pausing for breath. Mila perked up under the attention, but Noah remained quiet, picking at his food. The next morning, Caleb left the children with Mrs. Fletcher and went looking for Daniel Webster. He found the lawyer's office on a side street near the courthouse, a tidy brick building with the man's name painted on a shingle out front. The man who greeted Caleb was younger than expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles and ink stains on his fingers. He listened without interrupting while Caleb explained the situation, and when Caleb finished, Webster leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "Sheriff Crawford sent you, you said." "That's right. Tom's a good man. If he thinks you've got a case, that carries weight." Webster pulled out a ledger and made a few notes. "But I need to be straight with you, Mr. Rowan. This won't be easy. Hackett's got connections in Helena, and labor camps like his operate in a legal gray area. Technically, if he's got guardianship papers, even fraudulent ones, the burden of proof falls on us to show they're invalid. Valid. We can prove it. Noah was abandoned. Nobody appointed Hackett as guardian. He just claimed the boy. Can you prove the abandonment? Were there witnesses?" Caleb's stomach sank. "No. Just me finding him at the market." Webster made another note. "That's going to be a problem. Without documentation or witnesses, it's your word against Hackett's. And if he produces papers from a magistrate, then what do we do? We focus on the abuse, the conditions at the camp, the testimony of the boy himself. If we can convince the judge that returning Noah to Hackett's custody would endanger his life and welfare, we might be able to void the guardianship on those grounds." Webster looked up. "But I'll need details. Everything. And the boy will have to testify." "He's ready." "Is he?" "Because Hackett's lawyer will tear into him. They'll try to make him out as a liar, a thief, an ungrateful runaway. They'll question every detail, every memory. It'll be brutal." Caleb's jaw tightened. "He's tougher than he looks." "He'll need to be." Webster stood and extended his hand. "Bring him by tomorrow. I'll need to interview him, prepare him for what's coming. In the meantime, I'll start filing the paperwork for your custody petition. We'll need character witnesses for you as well, people who can testify that you're fit to be a guardian." "I'll arrange it." They shook hands, and Caleb left with a knot of worry in his gut. This was going to be harder than he'd hoped, but he'd known that from the start. Nothing worth having ever came easy. The next week passed in a blur of preparation. Webster interviewed Noah for hours, going over every detail of his time at Hackett's camp, preparing him for the kinds of questions the opposition would ask. The boy held up better than Caleb expected, answering with quiet determination even when the memories clearly hurt. Caleb tracked down old friends from his days before the mountains, a rancher he'd worked for, a shopkeeper who remembered him, the minister who'd married him and Sarah. One by one, they agreed to testify on his behalf, speaking to his character and his fitness as a father. Mila helped by keeping Noah's spirits up, dragging him to explore the town between meetings, showing him things he'd never seen, a general store with penny candy, a library with more books than either of them could count, a park where children played without fear. Slowly, Noah began to relax, to remember that the world held more than just pain. But the shadow of the coming trial hung over everything. The court date was set for early May, giving them 3 weeks to prepare. Webster worked tirelessly, building their case, anticipating every argument Hackett's lawyer might make. And when word reached them that Hackett had indeed hired a lawyer, a slick, expensive attorney from Helena named Morrison, the stakes became even clearer. "This Morrison is good," Webster told Caleb one afternoon. "He's gotten labor camp operators off before, knows how to manipulate the law, how to make abuse sound like discipline, exploitation sound like opportunity. Can you beat him?" "I can try. But Rowan, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that we might lose. The law isn't always just." "Then we don't lose," Webster smiled grimly. "I like your confidence. Let's hope the judge shares it." The night before the trial, Caleb couldn't sleep. He sat in the small room at Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house, listening to the children breathe in the next room, and thought about everything that had led to this moment. The question Mila had asked at a winter market, the decision to help a boy nobody else wanted, the slow transformation from 3 strangers into something that felt like family. If they lost tomorrow, all of it would be torn apart. He must have dozed eventually, because he woke to gray dawn light and the sound of Mila moving in the next room. When he emerged, both children were already dressed, Noah in the only good clothes they'd been able to find for him. Trousers that were almost the right length, a shirt that was only slightly too big, a jacket borrowed from one of Mrs. Fletcher's departed sons. "You look presentable," Caleb said, and Noah managed a weak smile. They ate breakfast in silence, then walked together through the mud-slicked streets to the courthouse. It was an imposing building of red brick and white columns, and Caleb felt Noah's hand slip into his as they climbed the steps. "It's going to be all right," Caleb said quietly. "You don't know that." "No, but I believe it, and sometimes that's enough." The courtroom was smaller than Caleb expected. Wooden benches, a judge's bench at the front, windows letting in morning light that did nothing to warm the space. Webster was already there, organizing papers. And on the other side of the room sat Hackett with his lawyer Morrison, a thin man in an expensive suit who looked at Noah like he was livestock being evaluated. Hackett himself hadn't changed, same thick neck, same hard eyes. When he saw Noah, he smiled, and it made Caleb's blood run cold. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Samuel Clayton," the bailiff announced. The judge who entered was an older man, maybe 60, with white hair and a face that had seen too much to be easily impressed. He settled into his chair, adjusted his spectacles, and looked over the assembled group. "We're here today to adjudicate the matter of custody regarding one Noah." He paused, consulting his papers. "Last name unknown. Mr. Hackett claims legal guardianship and seeks return of the child. Mr. Rowan contests this guardianship and has filed for custody himself. Is that correct?" Both lawyers affirmed it was. "Then let's proceed. Mr. Morrison, you may present your case." Morrison stood, every inch the polished professional. "Your Honor, this is a simple matter of law. My client, Walter Hackett, operates a work farm that provides shelter, food, and training to orphaned and abandoned children. 3 years ago, he took in the boy Noah, who was living on the streets of Helena with no family and no prospects. My client has documentation from Magistrate Henderson in Helena confirming his guardianship. He produced papers and handed them to the bailiff, who passed them to the judge. Clayton reviewed them without expression. "These appear to be in order," the judge said. "Continue." "Last December, the boy ran away from my client's farm, stealing food and money in the process. Mr. Hackett has been searching for him ever since, concerned for the child's welfare. When he learned the boy was being harbored by Mr. Rowan, he asked only that the legal guardianship be honored and the child returned to his care." Morrison sat down, satisfied. Webster stood immediately. "Your Honor, those papers are fraudulent. There's no record of Noah being legally surrendered to Mr. Hackett's guardianship. The boy was simply taken off the streets and put to work, along with numerous other children, in what amounts to a labor camp operating under the guise of charity." "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Webster. Can you prove it?" "I can, Your Honor. And I can prove that the conditions at this camp constitute abuse and endangerment. I'd like to call Noah to testify." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Noah stood on shaking legs and walked to the witness chair. The bailiff administered the oath, and Noah's voice was barely audible as he promised to tell the truth. Caleb watched the boy's face go pale, saw his hands grip the arms of the chair. Webster approached gently. "Noah, can you tell the court how old you are?" "8, sir, maybe 9. I don't know exactly." "And how did you come to be at Mr. Hackett's farm?" Noah took a breath. "My ma died when I was little. I was living on the streets in Helena. Mr. Hackett found me, said he'd give me food and a place to stay if I worked for him. I didn't know what kind of work." "What kind of work was it?" "Logging, cutting trees, hauling timber, from before sunrise until after dark. Sometimes longer if we didn't meet the quota." "How many other children were there?" "Maybe 20. The number changed. Some died. New ones came." A murmur went through the courtroom. The judge's expression didn't change, but Caleb saw his eyes sharpen. "You said some died," Webster continued. "Can you tell the court about that?" Noah's voice went flat, distant. "There was a boy named Sam. A tree fell on him because they didn't teach us proper. He lived for 2 days after, screaming. They wouldn't get a doctor, said it was too expensive. Another boy, Timothy, he got sick in the winter. They locked him in the shed for being too weak to work. He froze to death." "Objection," Morrison said sharply. "This is hearsay and unsubstantiated." "It's testimony from someone who was there," Webster cut in. "Your Honor, this boy witnessed these deaths. That's not hearsay." "I'll allow it," Clayton said. "Continue, Mr. Webster." "Noah, did Mr. Hackett or his men ever hurt you directly?" The boy's hand moved unconsciously to his ribs. "Yes, sir. If we were too slow or if we complained, they'd beat us. Mr. Hackett said it built character. Boone, one of his men, he liked using a strap. I've still got scars." "Can you show the court?" Noah stood and lifted his shirt. Even from where Caleb sat, he could see the marks, old welts, faded but still visible, crisscrossing the boy's back. Mila made a small sound of distress, and Caleb put his arm around her. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Hackett, are you seeing this?" Hackett's face was red. "The boy was disciplined when necessary, Your Honor. Nothing more than any father would do." "That's not discipline," Clayton said coldly. "That's brutality." He looked at Noah. "You may sit, son. Mr. Webster, proceed." Webster spent the next hour taking Noah through his testimony, the starvation rations, the dangerous working conditions, the complete lack of medical care or education. Noah's voice grew stronger as he spoke, like telling the truth was giving him power. Then it was Morrison's turn to cross-examine. "Noah," the lawyer said, his voice smooth as oil, "you say you were beaten, but isn't it true that you were often disobedient, that you refused to work?" "No, sir. I worked every day." "But you ran away. That's disobedient, isn't it?" "I ran because I was going to die there." "Or perhaps you ran because you wanted an easier life? Because you're lazy?" "Objection," Webster said. "Counsel is badgering the witness." "Sustained. Mr. Morrison, stick to questions." Morrison changed tactics. "You claim you stole nothing when you left. But Mr. Hackett has documented that food and supplies went missing the night you disappeared." "I took 1 loaf of bread and a blanket," Noah said. "I was starving, and it was winter. I would have died without them." "So you admit to theft?" "I admit to trying to survive." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "You seem very well spoken for a street urchin, almost like someone coached you on what to say." "Nobody coached me. I'm just telling what happened." "Are you? Or are you telling Mr. Rowan's version of events because you know he'll give you a comfortable life if you do?" Noah's eyes flashed. "Mr. Rowan saved my life. He didn't have to. He could have left me to freeze at that market, but he didn't. And he's never asked me to lie about anything. Not once." The courtroom was silent. Morrison tried a few more questions, but Noah held firm, his testimony unwavering. Finally, the lawyer sat down, looking less confident than when he'd started. "Mr. Webster, do you have additional witnesses?" the judge asked. "I do, Your Honor. I'd like to call Sheriff Tom Crawford." Crawford took the stand and testified about his visit to Caleb's cabin, about the condition he'd found Noah in, healthy, well-fed, clearly cared for. He spoke about his concerns regarding Hackett's camp and his recommendation that the matter be settled by the courts. "Sheriff, in your professional opinion, would it endanger this child to return him to Mr. Hackett's custody?" Webster asked. "Absolutely. I've seen enough to believe the boy's testimony. Returning him to that camp would be sending him back to abuse and possible death. Webster called other witnesses. The rancher who spoke to Caleb's character, the shopkeeper who testified about his honesty and reliability. Each piece built the picture of a man who could provide a safe, stable home. Finally, Webster called Caleb himself. "Mr. Rowan, why did you take Noah in?" Caleb met the judge's eyes. "Because my daughter asked if we could buy him, because he was freezing and starving and nobody else was helping, because I lost my brother when I was young and I couldn't save him, but I could save this boy." "Are you prepared to be his legal guardian, to provide for him, educate him, raise him as your own?" "I already do all those things. The papers are just making it official." "And if the court rules against you?" Caleb's jaw set. "Then I'll appeal. And if that doesn't work, I'll find another way. Because that boy belongs with me and my daughter. He's part of our family now, and I don't abandon family." When both sides had presented their cases, Judge Clayton called a recess. Caleb, Webster, and the children waited in the hallway while the judge deliberated. An hour passed. Then 2. Mila held Noah's hand, whispering reassurances, while Caleb paced and tried not to imagine the worst. Finally, the bailiff called them back. Judge Clayton looked over the assembled group, his expression grave. "I've reviewed the testimony and evidence presented today, and I'm prepared to render my decision." Caleb felt Noah's hand grip his, small and desperate. "Mr. Hackett, the documents you've provided appear legitimate on their face. However, testimony from multiple witnesses, including an officer of the law, suggests that your guardianship has been characterized by neglect and abuse. The physical evidence on this child's body supports those allegations." Hackett started to rise, but Morrison pulled him back down. "Furthermore," Clayton continued, "I find it deeply troubling that you've operated this work farm for years with minimal oversight and no accountability. The deaths Noah described, if true, constitute criminal negligence at minimum." "Your Honor," Morrison began. "I'm not finished." The judge's voice was steel. "I'm voiding your guardianship effective immediately on grounds of abuse and endangerment. Furthermore, I'm ordering an investigation into your farm and the conditions there. Sheriff Crawford, I'm deputizing you to conduct that investigation and report back to this court within 30 days. Crawford nodded grimly. "As for custody of Noah," Clayton said, turning to Caleb, "Mr. Rowan, you've demonstrated both the means and the character to provide for this child. I'm granting your petition for legal guardianship. Noah is now your son in the eyes of the law." The courtroom erupted. Mila threw her arms around Noah, who was crying too hard to speak. Caleb felt his own eyes burn, felt something tight in his chest finally release. Webster was grinning, shaking his hand, saying something about a victory, but Caleb barely heard it. He was focused on the boy, his son, who was looking at him with such hope and gratitude it almost hurt. "It's over," Caleb said quietly. "You're safe now. You're really, truly safe." Noah launched himself at Caleb, and Caleb caught him, held him tight, while the boy sobbed against his shoulder. Mila pressed close, too, and the three of them stood there in the middle of the courtroom, holding on to each other while the world rearranged itself around them. Across the room, Hackett's face was purple with rage, but Morrison was already pulling him toward the door. Whatever fight he'd had left was gone. The law had spoken. That night they celebrated at Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house with a feast she insisted on preparing: roast beef, fresh bread, apple pie. Other boarders joined them, offering congratulations, and for the first time in months, Noah laughed freely, without shadows. "So what happens now?" Mila asked through a mouthful of pie. "Now we go home," Caleb said. "Back to the mountains, back to our cabin. And we stay there? All of us? Forever?" "Forever," Caleb confirmed, looking at Noah. "If that's what you want." Noah nodded, unable to speak around the emotion clogging his throat. They left Boulder 3 days later, riding out under a bright May sky. The journey back was different from the journey down. Lighter somehow, like they'd shed a weight they'd been carrying. Noah sat straighter in the saddle, spoke more freely, smiled more easily. And when they crested the last ridge and saw the cabin nestled against the mountain, he breathed out a single word: home. The years that followed were good ones. Noah grew strong and capable, learning the mountains and the work with the dedication of someone who'd never take safety for granted. Mila remained his fiercest defender and closest friend, the two of them forming a bond that would last their whole lives. And Caleb, who'd thought his heart was too broken to love again, found it had simply been waiting for the right people to mend it. Sheriff Crawford's investigation shut down Hackett's camp within 2 months. The children there were placed in proper orphanages or with families who actually wanted them. Hackett himself faced criminal charges and spent 5 years in territorial prison. It wasn't enough. It could never be enough. But it was justice. On a warm evening 5 years after that day in the courtroom, Caleb sat on the cabin porch watching the sunset paint the valley gold. Noah was chopping wood behind the cabin, moving with the easy competence of a young man who knew his own strength. Mila was inside preparing supper, humming one of her mother's old songs. Caleb thought about the path that had brought him here, the grief that had driven him to these mountains, the years of isolation, the morning when everything changed. He thought about the boy nobody wanted who'd turned into the son he couldn't imagine life without. "Daddy?" Mila called from inside. "Supper's ready." "Coming, sweetheart." Caleb stood, his body protesting the movement the way it did more often now that he was pushing 50. But it was a good kind of ache, the kind that came from honest work and honest living. Noah came around the corner, arms loaded with firewood, face flushed from exertion. "Need help bringing anything in?" "Just yourself, come on." They gathered around the table, the three of them, and shared the meal Mila had prepared. The conversation flowed easy, talk of the day's work, plans for tomorrow, the kind of ordinary moments that made up a life. And when they were finished, when the dishes were cleared and the fire banked for the night, they sat together in the fading light and simply existed in each other's presence. "Thank you," Noah said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "For what?" Caleb asked. "For choosing me. For fighting for me. For making me part of this." Caleb looked at his son. Because that's what Noah was now, in every way that mattered, and smiled. "We didn't make you part of this, son. You were always part of it. We just had to find you first." Noah smiled back, and in his eyes, Caleb saw none of the fear and emptiness that had been there that winter day at the market. Instead, he saw peace, belonging, home. Outside, the mountains stood eternal against the darkening sky. The wind moved through the pines with a sound like breathing. And inside the cabin, 3 people who'd found each other against all odds settled in for another night together, grateful for the warmth and the safety and the love that had rebuilt what the world had broken. They'd started as strangers. They'd become a family. And that, Caleb thought, was the truest kind of miracle there was.